Chapter 668 New Offer. How did she do it? Ray was stunned beyond words as he felt the oracle's leg press on his chest as his body powerlessly remained glued to the floor. Her skin was as smooth as ever, and her graceful demeanor was not diminished by even a fraction. She still had the electrifying presence that he remembered, and the look she gave him from her eyes represented nothing but calmness. This didn't seem like a person who had just been smacked twice, and also burned to a crisp by an explosive blast. The oracle was looking absolutely fine. How did you do it? That is none of your business. She responded very curtly, her gaze narrowing on him as she most likely already determined his fate. Ray had run out of mana, and his physical state wasn't particularly the best at the moment. He wasn't capable of resisting, even if he wanted to. Damn. Is this really how it'll end? Gritting his teeth, his mind ran through several things as he watched the oracle mercilessly stare him down. It was clear she did not care for him in the slightest. Even after going all out, I still lost. I knew she was incomparably stronger, but for a moment, Ray actually thought he stood a chance. He realized the advantages that the system bestowed upon him through privileges. 50 plus subsequent stat points for every level up. Perfect resistance to appraisal and any other ability of the sort. Equalizer effect can be activated. Immunity to curses or all ailments and negative status conditions in the world. Soul preservation is in effect. Nothing in this world can kill you, as the world itself offers you guardianship. Effect can now be available to you. The equalizer effect really came in handy. There was no way I could have even reacted to someone with such high stats without this skill working overtime. Even more than the way Ray was incomparably stronger to someone with stats in the triple digits, so was the oracle to him. Yet, he managed to land hits on her. Also helped Emil too. And yet, he coughed out slightly, reasoning the way out of his current predicament. There was only one that he could see. Should I use the effect? Ray didn't know the use or function of the skill, but he was very desperate at this point. The system said he could only use it once, which probably meant it was a very powerful and destructive skill. I could use a bit of that right now, Ray imagined to himself. Still, something held him back from going along with the only seeming option that was available to him. It was uncertainty. What if it's a suicide move? What if Esm gets caught in it? I still don't know where she is. All of these thoughts culminated into hesitance, bringing about his impotence. Still, he wouldn't stop glaring at her with burning determination. Your resistance is born out of ignorance. I already told you. It is useless, she said to Ray, her voice a calm whisper. I can't fall. I can't die. You weren't the only one blessed with certain privileges by the world, Ray. Ray was forced to swallow her words as she said them. Her class is higher than mine, so it only makes sense that her privilege is also that good. I can't see them for some reason, but he could guess that she was also immortal and probably had some sort of damage nullification. She was definitely leagues above him. Even with the difference in their power shoved in his face, and the oracle's calm manner of telling Ray to cease his futility, there was only one thing Ray could respond with. I won't leave here without Esm. As soon as he said this, he felt the leg of the oracle press even harder on his chest as her eyes narrowed a little. It seemed she was a little annoyed by Ray and his reaction, but the detail was so subtle that one could easily miss it. Then, she parted her lips and said the most unexpected thing. If you really want to have her that badly, then there is a way. Ray's eyes widened as he heard this, his wide gaze resting on the oracle's calm face. She slowly removed her leg away from his chest and slowly walked a few steps back, allowing Ray to sit up while still looking at her with a dazed face. He didn't understand her change of heart, or this new way that she seemed to be proposing. Still, he was very interested in it. What is the way? Asking with so much energy that one would not have thought he was still recovering from unbelievable pain, his voice filled the hall. The oracle paused. She looked at him in silence for a few moments and then sighed to herself. If you can find a proper replacement for Esm, then I will choose that replacement and not her. For a moment, Ray was dazed by this. A replacement? Yes. An elf that fulfills all the requirements I have informed you of. One with Esm's special bloodline. Unsullied by the world or its corruption. Hearing all of this further drove Ray into confusion. I thought elves like that only appear once every cycle or something. How can I find someone like that now? If an elf like that existed, Ray had a feeling the oracle would have chosen her and not Esm, who was just a half-elf. The whole thing felt like a wild goose chase. But, right now, what other choice do I have? At least, I should listen some more. If the oracle wanted to banish him out of her domain, she would have done so already. That meant she still had some sort of use for him, and there was some measure of legitimacy to her offer. Tell me more about this replacement. How do I go about it? Chapter 669, The Only Way. Within the silence of the oracle's domain, two entities faced each other in palpable tension. Ray was seated on the floor, while the oracle watched him from her graceful position as she stood with the most upright stature ever. The silence that existed between them only lasted a second before Ray spoke up once again, after asking his first question. I don't know where to begin with this task. What exactly am I supposed to do? Ray said this for two major reasons. First, I want to confirm whether or not this was her intention from the start. If Esm is just a hostage for me to fulfill this role and get her the actual heir. And the second reason. To learn more about what I'm supposed to do here. The way Ray saw it, he was stuck in an impossible situation. I have to tread carefully here. He nodded to himself, grateful that the oracle didn't even seem upset about the attacks that he rendered towards her. Or attacks that he thought he rendered towards her. I'm supposed to be immune to mind control and illusions, but it's possible her class privilege makes her an exception to the rule. So, it was possible that Ray never even struck her and everything was in his head. That made sense since she seemed too calm for someone he hit so violently. She landed a few heavy hits, but she could still land more. Yet Ray sensed no resentment from her in the slightest. She was just cold and detached from him and the whole thing. You may begin by helping the elves wipe out the dragons. If you do that, a path is bound to open up for you. A path will open up? What do you mean by that? You'll understand when it happens. She responded with a shrug, but her vagueness seemed unnecessary. Why does it feel like she's just trying to use me to destroy the dragons for the elves? Ah. I see what's happening here. Ray's thoughts began to trail as he kept his eyes on her. She probably thinks that if she sends me back, I'll leave the side of the elves or even turn against them. She must still value them, and she wants to preserve their lives, even if she can't do anything about the dragons directly. If allowed her to see everything in the world, or at least in the elven continent, then she must have known about how he helped the elves in some instances. As well as how useful he could be in the ensuing conflict. She's using me to help her people, while also dangling a prize in front of me. The reward for his services was that he would get a chance to save Esm from her impending fate. But something about the deal seemed too one-sided. It's unfair towards me. I know what you are thinking, Ray, but do not worry. This agreement benefits both of us. You say that, but I don't trust you. He sharply responded. There was no need to hide away his feelings. Since she could practically read his thoughts at this point, or rather, it seemed like she could, he had nothing to keep to himself. He would just give it to her straight. Your deal benefits you and your elves more than it benefits me. I save your people from the dragons, and then I get a replacement for you to get Esm back. That doesn't sound so even to me. Oh, but it is. The oracle responded calmly. How so? Because you have no real choice in the matter. I require a replacement, else the world as you know it will end. The moment Ray heard this, the bravado he put on collapsed almost instantly. What? He had to spit out in surprise. There is a delicate balance that has to be kept, and my expiration is slowly approaching. Without someone to take on the mantle, the Dragon Emperor's side will be left unchecked. She responded calmly. This whole war was an intricate game between the Oracle and the Dragon Emperor, one that involved checks and balances. If her side weakened, he would be given the perfect chance to strike. You can either follow the path and find a replacement, or I choose Esm as my heir. One has to be done, or you will lose everything and everyone you love. The oracle's words sent shivers down Ray's spine. She was completely serious with him, and he could feel his bones jittering for a moment before acclimating to the tense moment he was in. I still don't trust her, but I don't want to imagine what will happen if she isn't here doing whatever she is doing to keep the Dragon Emperor at bay. If they were equal in power, that meant the Oracle was the only one who could stop the Emperor. I have to find a replacement that isn't Esm. So, what do you say, Ray? The Oracle asked with a soft, patient tone. She waited for his answer, an unassuming gaze watching him ever so blankly as he mulled over the matter. I would like to ask for an audience with Esm first of all. No. Why no? You'll have an audience with her once you eliminate the dragons and see the path. Do not worry, I won't touch her until then. Like I can just take you at your word. It is like I said. You have no choice in the matter. The oracle responded, still acting calm and detached as if none of it mattered to her. I could decide to abandon the deal and turn against the elves. I could take the side of the dragons and exterminate every single elf that exists here. Ray's cruel smile as he said this was meant to pass a message across, and indeed it did. The oracle's expression instantly changed the moment she heard this. For the very first time since he saw her, she gave him an enchantingly brilliant smile. Do as you wish. Chapter 670 Unsavory Mix of Emotions. Bwooyush. The lights of the hallowed shrine shone brighter as it welcomed Ray back into its inner embrace. As the young man felt the cool ground of the sanctum, breathing in its air and staring at the statue whose bright eyes were beginning to dim, he took in a deep breath. Hugh. Then, he exhaled slowly. He did all of this to calm himself, controlling the rabid emotions that threatened to burst through the threshold and consume him. That's right. Ray was feeling a myriad of emotions as he reappeared in the world as he knew it. He felt frustration, rage, disappointment, confusion, sadness, and a bunch of other feelings all coming at him at once, nearly overflowing within his stationary form. Still, even with all of these, Ray maintained a straight facade. In the end, I had to accept the deal. His thoughts trailed as he leaked out more heavy exhalations, doing his best to breathe deeply. I had no real choice, just as she said. Even when I tried bargaining, all of it fell through. Apparently, he had overestimated the oracle's interest in the elves. What was at the top of her priority was an heir, and Esm was a perfect candidate for that. She returned me here without letting me get too many words in. I guess she has no doubt that I'll follow through with the deal. Ray truly didn't like being used like this. He hated being a mere piece in a game that he didn't even understand. Perhaps that what caused his ever-growing frustration. No. That wasn't all. How could Esm just leave me like that? We could have at least talked it out. In a way, Ray felt mad at her for just choosing the option that would most definitely end with the both of them separating. However, he couldn't completely get angry at Esm. He also felt incredible guilt within himself. If this is truly what she wants, then am I not standing in the way of her goals? Should I really be doing this? He thought to himself, mulling over his choice once again. Do I really have the right to do this? Contemplation wasn't helping in calming his emotions. In fact, since they only made the burden on him worse, he decided to postpone the act. I just have to help the elves, and I'll find a way to get the replacement somehow. Esm will be free, and Alicia will be saved. I'll have my cake and eat it at the same time. There's no need to overthink anything. Ray felt like his head was hurting, even though it really wasn't. He was just feeling tired. I should get out of here. After one more deep breath, he activated his spatial magic and vanished from the shrine. Boom. That exact moment, his scenery changed and he found himself inside his lodge within the luxurious room that the elves had presented for him. Everything was immaculately arranged, but it all felt utterly bland and ugly, almost like the entire place was a dump. I guess this is only natural, considering how amazing the Oracle's domain is. He felt like crumpling on his bed and forcing himself to sleep. At the very least, that would reduce the burdens that assailed his mind at the moment. Maybe he could also dream of having Esm by his side. That'll have to wait for now, though. As his gaze turned to the entrance of his abode, he narrowed his eyes. He had a visitor, and it wasn't someone he could really ignore. In a breath, he found himself right before his door, twisting the knob so he could see his guest and not keep her waiting. Kara. He murmured, seeing her brilliant face as he opened the door. Her green hair looked messy, and her glasses also seemed a little out of place. She also seemed to be out of breath, which meant it hadn't been long since she arrived at his place. It made Ray a little relieved that she wasn't waiting for him for too long. After all, I'm not really in the mood to see anyone. His thoughts were in disarray, and the one thing he needed more than anything was rest. He even shut Emil out of his thoughts, so she couldn't hear him and he couldn't hear her. At the moment, he didn't want any kind of interaction. I understand, Sir Ray, but I have just made an important discovery that I think will interest you. Ray rolled his eyes and sighed. He really wished people could get the message the first time he spoke, but it seemed he just had to drill it in. Should I have just ignored her from the start? It's about Esm. Esm? What about her? His energy returned almost instantly, and the dead look in his eyes completely vanished. His heart nearly jumped for a moment, but he controlled it at the last moment. Even Kara was a little startled by the suddenness of his reply, as well as the switch he made from lethargy to enthusiasm. It took her about a second to compose herself before speaking again. And not really about Esm, but it's in close relation to her. I found out about her mother. Ciela. Ray's eyes widened slightly. He was a bit curious about how Kara got to piece together the information about Ciela, and how she was related to Esm, but that didn't stop the disappointment that was now creeping on his face. I'm sure she worked hard to gather the information, but I already learned about her from the Oracle. There's nothing new here. He just didn't know how to break it to the over-enthusiastic Kara, who was now gushing very hard the moment Ray mentioned her name. Why, you already know? Amazing. As expected of you, sir. Well. Yeah. In any case, you really should leave now. Ray mumbled, his sigh resuming as he felt a slow pull of depression tug at him. You don't want to see her or anything? Huh. Confusion played on both Ray and Kara's faces as they stared at each other. Before Ray could open his lips to ask her what she meant by her words, Kara went on to ask another question that made everything clear in an instant. I mean, she's being confined by the elves? Don't you want to see her at least? Chapter 671 Tainted Elf. Ciela is alive. As Ray uttered those words, looking at Kara's slightly stunned face, he realized he never actually thought about the fate that befell Asm's mother. He never considered the implication of her being alive either until now. Tell me more about this. His exhaustion instantly vanished, and the pale expression on his face brightened up instantly. He led Kara into his abode, closing the door behind them as he listened to her explaining how she was able to piece it all together. Talking to the elders, narrowing it down by speaking to the esteemed ones, her investigation was very thorough. Still, even though Ray was very impressed that she could get such cooperation out of the elves and pry into so much information, he wasn't really interested in her methodology. All that was relevant was the actual information on Ciela. You said they have her captive, right? Tell me more about that. Ray sat on his chair, opposite his bed where he told her to sit. Well. Yeah. In a secret chamber where only the esteemed elders have access to. And she's alive. Well. Yeah. But it's not that simple. As soon as Ray heard this, he raised his brow and made a complicated face. Kara took this as her cue to explain further. The elves placed her in a state of eternal sleep. That is the highest punishment they can give to one of their own, forcing them to sleep until their life runs out and they die. Since elves had a no-kill rule, they couldn't eliminate even their most severe offenders. However, by placing the perpetrators in a state akin to death, allowing nature to run its course over them, they had their own form of execution. So, she's not fully dead. But she's not really alive either. Ray mumbled to himself, his fingers stroking his chin as a certain image flashed into his mind. Reminds me of Alicia. Did they use some kind of curse, or is it just magic? He couldn't determine that on his own. I see. Well, I better hear all of this from the horse's mouth. Closing his eyes and controlling his breath, Ray spread his senses beyond the confines of his immediate surroundings. I'd like to speak to the esteemed elders about this. Please, Lord Ray. Do not see her. She has become tainted, corrupt and unholy. Do reconsider your choice. We beg of you. The esteemed elders all had their heads bowed as Ray stood before a rather gnarled tree. The tree stood at the center of a large room at the basement of the esteemed council hall. It had fireflies dancing around it, with darkness filling the expanse for the most part. The little critters not only illuminated the ugly-looking bark, but also highlighted the worried faces of the elves that were still pleading with Ray even as he stepped forward and neared the tree. The room was plain, and it smelled of earth. The grassy ground and perpetual darkness almost made it seem like this was nighttime. However, if one looked up, they would only see the cold hard ceiling that reflected the same blackness around. In essence, a starless sky. I've already come this far. I might as well. Ray muttered under his breath and stretched out his hand towards the tree's massive trunk. I need to see for myself. Once his hand touched the tree, he did not feel any hard bark or rough resistance. Rather, he felt a rather slimy membrane that seemed to pull him in the further he pushed. And so, he pushed even further. Slowly, Ray began to get sucked into the tree. Offering no resistance at all, it only took him a few seconds to be completely absorbed into it. And, once Ray was transported into another space. Within this tight compartment, there was nothing in sight but one entity. She seemed glued to the wall, completely naked, with parts of her body buried deep inside the black, slime-like wall. Her arm was stuck in, up to her elbow, and her legs suffered the same fate, leaving her knees upward exposed. A part of her hair was also sucked in, but everything else was exposed. Ray could see all of it, from her bare chest, to her slender, malnutritioned body, to the long ears she possessed, and every aspect of her body. So this is why they didn't want me to see you, Ciela. Yes, the one before him was an elf. But she was one unlike anything he had seen in this world. For one, her entire skin was ebony, having a slightly darker tint than Tricia's. Her hair, which must have been previously white, was now pitch black. Her ears seemed much longer than a normal elf's, and that was pretty much the visible difference that existed between her and the others. A dark elf, huh? So this is what it means to be tainted. The scent coming off her was moldy, and even Ray could feel bitterness along with a hint of sourness ooze out of her. He reckoned she must have smelled really nice at some point. If I ignore the tan and malnutrition, she really does resemble Esme, especially the Esme that I first met back when she was to be sold as a slave. They were so similar that Ray was thankful this one had a darker skin tone. Else, their images would overlap perfectly with each other. He took a few steps closer to the sleeping elf, his eyes fixated on her every feature until he was mere inches from her. Then, he touched her face and felt its roughness. She's been here for over 16 years. According to the elders, it'll take a few more decades before she finally dies off due to malnutrition and mana deprivation. Regular elves would have died at this point, but thanks to the heritage that Ciela had, the same one within Esme, she was more tenacious than other elves. And it was due to that very same identity of hers that she was being punished now. You became tainted after killing, and abandoning your duties as the Oracle's heir. Now, you suffer here forever. As he whispered this, something inside him began to clench. He felt a spark rising within him. I want to change that somehow. Chapter 672, Discourse in Solitude. As he stood still, watching the woman on the wall, Ray remembered the words of the elders. He was reminded of her sins. Apparently, what is known as the Oracle is an amalgamation of the wills of all the predecessors that came before the current host, all of which will be embodied in one avatar. The current Oracle had the joint personality of the ones before her, and if Esme became the Oracle, she would suffer the same fate. I can't allow that. If she goes through with it, she won't be Esme anymore. To stop such a thing from happening, the only visible hope he had was the elf that was currently before him. I just have to find a way to untaint her. But, even that seems impossible at the moment. Still, it was far better than the alternative. Elves that were born compatible with the Oracle like Ciela and Esme were only born every 1,000 years or so. There could also only be one at a time. I can't wait for 1,000 years, which means I have to find a solution with what I've been dealt with. Ray gritted his teeth. Unfortunately, he didn't have the ability to achieve that. Yet. I suppose this is where my mission with the dragons comes into play. Sighing to himself, he pinched his forehead. Even after investigating to this point, he wasn't any less confused. At times like this, I should speak to someone. Ray's eyes lit up the moment he had that thought. In the first place, coming to this land wasn't his idea, so why exactly was he agonizing over details like this when he could also bring his familiar into it? You. Leaking out a smile, he turned to leave the room of darkness, only turning his head for another brief look at Ciela. Must find a way for sure. There was tense silence in Ray's room as he sat on his bed all alone. Well, perhaps alone wouldn't be the most accurate way to describe his state of affairs. He was with Emile, who constantly spoke to his thoughts, expecting a response. Other than her, however, there was someone else too. I see. So that's what has happened thus far. The voice that resounded in the room was deep, and it dripped with evil. Something amusing seemed to dwell in his tone despite how serious it was. What should I do, Ader? Ray stared hard at a communication device, a black box that sat on the table in front of him. That was where Ader's voice was coming from, and for some reason, despite it being a mere box, Ray kept his gaze locked on it. My simple advice would be to simply follow as the Oracle says. At least for now. It's the safest option. Right? I thought so too. Even if it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Indeed. This also coincides with the plan to bring the elves over to our side, so if you assist them in this, it's not a total loss for you. Ray nodded and sighed. The only major difference between the two cases was that he was initially helping them out of his own free will, mostly for Esm's sake. And out of his limited compassion, but the current situation was completely different. I'm being forced to help them. There's no room for error or casual action. This was a mission. Hopefully you find more answers there as well. I will look into things on my end to see how I can help your situation better. That seemed to be the end of the conversation, but Ray wasn't quite done yet. He still had one more thing on his mind. Ader. About the scar on the land of the elves? He began, his eyes narrowing a bit more with every word he uttered. Did you know about it? There was silence in the room for a few seconds. Not even the breathing from both sides could be heard. Everything simply fell into an absolute lull. Then. I did. Ader finally replied with a low, nigh quiet voice. It almost appeared as though he was a little anxious with the way he answered. And you intentionally left that part out of your report, huh? Okay. Next question. Even as he said these heavy words, Ray's expression remained mostly stoic. He had no anger or other kinds of emotions displayed. Other than hints of seriousness etched onto his features, he seemed completely neutral. Is Adrian the one behind this? Is he on the side of the dragons? Yes, Master. I see. Ray interlocked the fingers from both hands and bent a little as he stared hard at the box. A million thoughts had to have been running in his mind at the moment. Once the uncomfortable silence reached its climax, Ader had to intervene. Are you upset, Master? That you didn't inform me of these things? No, I'm not. You always operate with something beneficial in mind, and that is what I'm trying to figure out. Ray could say he trusted Ader a great deal at this point. They had been through too much for him not to feel that way. Especially with the latter's track record and efficiency in his tasks. Ader was completely loyal to him and acted for Ray's benefits. Yes, some of his methods can be extreme, which is why I have to make sure he is measured in any mission's execution. Other than that, though, he's pretty solid. So why exactly did the ever-so-loyal Ader hide all of this from Ray? Well, he was about to find out. You are correct, Master. I kept some of these details hidden for a reason. I will divulge a bit of a synopsis on that now. Go on. Ray's monotone echoed. Adrian is working with the dragons for a reason that I am yet to decipher. I could go on with the details, but it would be preferable if I didn't. At this point, Ray's curiosity was beyond piqued. He had to know more. Why? Asterisk. 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 Chapter 673 Discourse in Solitude. I have incomplete information, so there's the possibility that you will be misguided and act on bias when you inevitably encounter him. I deduced you would eventually figure out that Adrian was here, and responsible for the demise of so many elves. So I wanted you to witness it yourself and form your thoughts on them before hearing my report on the matter. I don't think that's enough justification, though. Ray responded to Ader with a harsh tone. Perhaps. But, I believe it would be preferable for you to confront Adrian without much of your preconceived notions, especially regarding the boy. Are you telling me to trust him? No. But give the opening for that trust. What does that mean? Have you ever sat down and listened to Adrian? Maybe if you did so, and the both of you conversed at length with as minimal biases as possible, the conversation could end up becoming very fruitful. You want me to calmly converse with someone responsible for mass genocide? Answer me, Ader. Ray raised his voice a little higher than normal, and the calming effect swiftly took over and soothed him. All of his growing anger and frustration with Ader instantly vanished. Master. Do you truly believe that there is not a chance in the world that you could ever be in Adrian's position? What? Is there nothing that you would be capable of going to any lengths to accomplish? Even if it meant taking the side of monsters? It was now Ray's turn to be silent. He creased his brow and thought hard about what Ader was implying. You killed the members of the underworld back then because you determined them to be a danger to the United Human Alliance. What if you found out the elves were the same? But they're not. I never said that was the reason. All I am saying is that Adrian must at least have a reason for doing what he is doing. It all hinges on the deal he has with the dragons. So, you want me to give him the benefit of the doubt and hear him out? That would be my advice, Master. Ray sighed, his frown slowly dissipating from his face. It's odd that Ader would take such a sympathetic role regarding Adrian. Still, he has a good point. With the elves being the way they were, perhaps there were certain things that could push him to the edge. When he faced the Oracle, he actually even considered it. I'll try. Ray finally murmured out. Thank you very much, Master. But, if Adrian is here, doesn't that mean he is aware of my presence in the land of the elves as well? You don't need to worry about that, Master. I have it all sorted out. Ah. Okay. After a series of conversation with Ader mainly about what was going on in the capital, and how it was being handled, Ray finally hit his breaking point. His emotions were in a constant roller coaster that it was a chore just to keep them in check. It was eating at him at such an absurd rate. Ultimately, Ray decided to sleep everything off and eliminate all the fatigue that had been building up. Master. Emil watched over him as he lay on his bed. Her black, slime-like form stood over him like a guardian angel, observing his every features. Almost like a creep, in all honesty. This had become her habit any time Ray slept, and the serenity of the night helped her absorb more of the scene. Unfortunately for her, this time would be different. Hey. Emil. A voice suddenly echoed within the room, causing the symbiote slime to almost jump up in fright. Her jelly-like body danced as she screeched, turning back in an instant to glare at the one who interrupted her silent moment with Ray. There was no one behind her. No one else was in the room. Over here, Emil. The voice came again, and this time, the symbiote slime had her attention drawn to the black box that still sat on Ray's chair. Her slimy body slithered towards it, and while she had no facial feature of any kind, her sour mood was obvious from the way she moved. "What do you want, Ader?" She recognized the voice, and she also knew the only one who could reach Ray through the box was him. She was certain it was him. "How cold, Emil? If you want to speak to Master, you can't right now." "He's asleep." Her response was curt and downright prideful, a sharp contrast to Ader's smooth tone. Still, the man at the other end of the box did not lose his cool. He continued with grace. "I know. I actually called to speak to you, Emil." Emil swerved a portion of her slim-like body to the side, the same way a human would cock their head. She was, naturally, met with confusion. "Me? Why?" She and Ader had never spoken without Ray being present. In fact, she didn't fancy speaking to anyone that wasn't Ray, which was why she usually only spoke through his thoughts. However, since he had been ignoring her so much, Emil was beginning to get lonely. And so, when Ader gave her the attention she had been deprived of for so long, a crack began to appear on her little facade. "Because I need you, Emil. Something big is going to happen soon, and I need a favor from you." More confusion took over Emil, though with her completely black body didn't allow them to be obvious. She shook slightly, though. "And need me? Why would I help you at all?" "Oomph. Because doing so would help Master as well. Don't you want to assist him?" Emil turned back to look at the sleeping Ray, and her position softened slightly. She felt more inclined to listen to Ader's words. Still, she was still confused. "Why didn't you tell Master this when you were having a conversation with him earlier?" "Because he likes surprises, and we both have to keep this a secret until the fullness of time. It's very important, do you understand?" Emil still had questions, but her curiosity, loneliness, and eagerness to please took over everything else, and she nodded enthusiastically as she drew even closer to the black box. "Understood. What do you need me to do?" Chapter 674 The Dragon's Camp. At the heart of the blighted lands within the Elf continent, near the northern shore that had now been completely desecrated, taken over by the strangers from another land, there was a meeting being held. It took place within a tent, one of the many that stood erect in the barren land. Unlike the others, however, this had a certain grandeur to it. This place was clearly the heart of their operations, and the arena where only the most elite of contributors could be gathered in. The Grand Tent. Its interior was several times more impressive than how it was represented from the outside. Perhaps this was due to its plentiful furniture and ample designs, despite it being nothing but a tent within a battle camp. Even with the tension within the place, an air of regality still remained there. Perhaps due to the exclusivity associated with the gathering that was currently taking place there, or the caliber of people present, the tent had a nigh flavorful vibe. There was a massive and long table located at the center of the room, with 3 figures seated at the head of the table. They were dressed in blue, purple, and ash respectively, though it was inevitable that they would have intricate designs on their attire. Regardless of color, these 3 were clearly the ones in charge of the meeting. They were the only generals present, after all. The others who sat at both the left and right sides of the table were dragon commanders, all elite in their own right. They numbered a total of 5 on each end, making a total of 10 commanders. Then, at the foot of the table was a certain young man. He did not resemble a dragon, as he had no horns or tail. His features were very human-like, though that was not the only odd thing about him. The young man had an oddly twisted smile as he sat among the dragons, his glassy eyes taking in what they were saying while maintaining proper silence. He also appeared quite young, about 16 or 17 years of age. Barely an adult human in this world. Still, there was none within the room that treated him with scorn or disrespect. They wouldn't dare. Why? Because they all recognized his value. Discrimination against him would not only be unnecessary on their part, but also foolish. The days of those pointy-eared idiots are numbered. They're being pushed back at an extremely rapid rate now. One of the commanders, the one giving the report, said with a rather prideful tone. Everyone who listened cracked a smile or a scoff at the subjects of the discussion. They all seemed incredibly pleased by what they were hearing. We estimate the conquest's progress will be brought right on schedule very soon. Within this week, in the latest, we would have completely taken over their camp. They all chuckled at the news. All 13 dragons belonged to the same group, one of the elite dragon squads in the Empire. In fact, they were hailed as the second best in the whole of the Empire. That was, in part, the reason they chose this mission despite its intricacy and difficulty. If they succeeded, there would be no doubt about their placement in the Empire. No one would dispute the fact that they belonged to the top spot. Congratulations. I'm very happy for you. The voice of the young man who sat at the foot of the table echoed within the tent, causing all its inhabitants to instantly look in his direction. Since he was the furthest from them, their intimidating gaze focused on him at once. Anyone would find it scary. Not him, though. With this, you'll take the first step in cleansing the world of the elves and finally taking over their resources. It will be a great victory for the Empire. His response was filled with composure, and his attitude towards the dragon's obvious predators of humanity was all too natural. Either he was a great actor, or he truly had no fear of them. Ha ha ha. Thank you, Adrian. We couldn't have done this all without you. Indeed. You truly made this easier for us. You've done a commendable job thus far. We owe you greatly. The 3 dragon generals all echoed words of praises to Adrian, who simply accepted them with the utmost humility. What else was he to do, really? I only saved them from making a fool of themselves and completely ruining any chance they had of ever ascending the ranks. Adrian Chase smiled internally as he bowed his head in response to their very underwhelming words. It was obvious that they were underselling his role in the current conquest, but what did he care? Their pride won't let them say it as it is. His grin widened even more. But we all know that they owe me everything. Just months ago, the dragons were in trouble due to the elves upping their game and somehow getting their hands on the enchanted items. Having tools really revolutionized combat for the elves, who had barely any combat prowess before then. It was clear that the dragons were desperate, and the generals began contemplating attacking the elves personally as a last resort, which basically meant they were pushed to their limits. Their pride wouldn't have that at all. I initially came to this land to see if I could benefit from the elves by offering more items and slowly taking over their community. But Adrian closely looked at the dragons before him with a sly gaze. I later realized these ones would be more useful. He was able to learn a lot in the time he spent here, even before approaching the dragons with a deal. The advantages they offered him, especially in the long run, far outweighed his prospects with the elves. It helped matters that they were failing to meet up with their conquest quota. There was even supposed to be an excursion from their academy, but due to how unstable things were at the time, they had to use every excuse in the book to postpone. The fact that they were forced to delay the request made by a dragon lord showed just how precarious the whole thing was at the time. Adrian knew all of this by infiltrating the camp and learning more about the dragons and their dealings. He initially did this to possess sufficient information in order to further assist the elves, but after learning all he learned, including something highly irresistible, he had to change his mind. In the end, I had to approach them with an offer they could not resist. By using his necromancy on the dragon corpses, while also presenting the other monsters he had in his stockpile, he was able to convince the dragons of his power. He even offered them a demonstration, revealing just how merciless he could be. He did everything he could to convince them, until they finally took the bait. And here we are now. This was his first time ever in such a meeting among the upper echelon. He would usually be called for an audience with one of the generals, who would then tell him his task. They rarely allowed him to give any counsel, or suggestions, or anything of the sort. But, slowly, he worked his way to the point he was currently at. He earned it. It's just as the commander said. The camp should be completely taken over by the end of the week at the latest. Once we've taken down the last bastion of resistance from their end, things will be relatively easier going forward. Adrian was relieved about this, since he could finally take a break from all the work and focus on something else he had been putting off for a while. The dungeon here. I'll finally have the time to harvest more monsters to add to my collection. The minerals there should also be very pure, probably comparable to what the dragons have in the northern continent. Based on the climate and mana density that the land of the elves had, Adrian considered it a very big possibility. Once I get some time off, I'll hurry and take care of it. With all of those thoughts flowing through his mind, he still didn't forget to address a rather pertinent matter to him. I am glad to be of service to the Empire's conquest. On that note, I would also like to remind you of the deal we made. My reward for the services that I have rendered. His voice was soft and low, but there was a certain power that warbled deep within his tone. We understand, Adrian. An audience with the Lord, right? Of course. That will definitely be arranged. You will have what you seek. Upon hearing this, Adrian's smile broadened, almost resembling that of an excited child, and he bowed his head once more. That is all I ask. Thank you very much.